Elemental reactions are the bread and butter of Genshin Impact's combat system, and the amount of freedom you have when constructing a team utilizing them is one of the reasons I keep playing the game. But, like all things in life, they aren't created equal. Some reactions are more fun or more powerful than others, so I tend to gravitate towards them more. But recently, I got to think, which reactions are really the best, which are really not. So, I decided to make a video on it, and now, here I am. A simple ranking of all the elemental reactions in Genshin, because I really wanted to do another video on this game. Seriously, the ratio of time spent in this game to videos to make on it is ridiculously tiny. It's bizarre. Anyways, on the video. Firstly, some criteria. This won't take too long. Our ranking of reactions can be triggered by any character of any element, and only the actual reactions. You know, the big words that show up after smacking the enemy. So, in other words, I would be including Petrify, because it's locked to one character not really reacting to anything. And I also won't be including Fridge, because it's not a real reaction, nor Shatter, because it's also not really a reaction. And lastly, I'm going to be including Quicken, Aggravate, and Spread in one spot, because while they are different, they're similar enough to make it redundant to count them all separately, and they probably just end up next to each other anyways. Weird criteria? Maybe, but no matter. Oh yeah, one more thing. I'm no expert in this game, I just play to do stupid things to make big numbers, so this video is going to be almost entirely my opinion, which will be wrong, so take everything here with a grain of salt. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the actual ranking, starting with... The first two reactions are two that are just really more unfortunate than anything. They aren't bad on paper, but due to some decisions made since the game release, they really don't have much place in things anymore, and are better ignored. The first of these is what I believe to be the worst reaction, Crystallize. Crystallize occurs when you combine Geo with any other element that isn't Anemo or Dendro. But that's just the problem with it. With the addition of characters like Goru, Zhongli, and Albedo, Geo has become this bizarre element that only really works with itself. Most Geo characters just end up supporting other Geo characters, which means that aside from fighting slimes, or maybe having Bennett on your team, you really won't be crystallizing much if you use Geo right. But even if you have just one Geo character, Crystallize simply isn't a good reaction. It'll create a shard of the element you hit Geo with, which can be picked up to give your characters a shield of that element. However, Geo characters are kind of known for having obscene defense, and a good chunk of them can already make their own shields, or block damage in other ways, so there's never really any point in getting Crystallize's shield. Unless you're fighting an enemy who only attacks with one element they can get a shield of. But even then, the shield you get for the reaction is weak sauce. Like, sure, you could invest all your EM artifacts into a Geo character to make some actually crazy Crystallized shield. Or you could give them half as much defense and make a twice as strong shield that works on all Geo teams. No matter how you look at it, Crystallize is just a reaction that isn't worth building around. With middling output and no synergy, you'd be better off sticking with only Geo. For the first 2 years of Genshin's life, burning was just kind of there to remind you that Dendro was, in fact, an element in the game. It was used to destroy shields and kill Dendro slimes, and that was about it. Now, flash forward 2 years. Dendro has been released as a playable element. It has some of the most synergy with all the elements, and amplifies their effects to make them all do crazy damage. Aggravate, Burgeon, Hyperbloom, all of these are some of the strongest reactions in the game. And next to all these amazing reactions Dendro has, burning is just kinda there. Burning will do a pyro damage over time, and that's it. Compared to all the flashy reactions Dendro got, burning just feels really underwhelming now, and that's because it is. The damage over time just can't compare with the damage output of the other reactions from the element, and it only ever triggers a side effect when going for a Burgeon. Now, burning isn't entirely useless. If you have a character who can constantly apply Dendro, and has some crazy EM, or in other words Nahida, and light an enemy on fire, that 800 damage tick can add up, which is why I put it above Crystallize. But in the time it takes to kill an enemy by burning them to death, you could kill 3 with the other Dendro reactions. There's really nothing more to burning. It's just a simple reaction that serves as a relic from earlier in the game's life, and it's just out of place in the modern age. Moving on from that duo, we come to the middle ground of reactions, the one that separates good from bad. That's because it is the most boring reaction in the game. Vaporize doesn't do anything. Every single reaction in the game does damage scaling with your EM, and will then hit enemies with some other effect, like an explosion, or a shield you can pick up, or a core that will cause another reaction. Every one of them. Except Vaporize. Oh, and also Melt. It does damage, and that's it. Like, sure, it has the quirk of doing more damage if you hit the pyro with a Hydro, but so does Melt, which is just a significantly more powerful reaction. Vaporize isn't bad, it can do some nice damage, but doesn't do anything to stand out from the other dozen reactions in the game. Every reaction from here on up is one I really do like, significantly more than the first 3, so even though I love it, something needs to fill a 10th slot, and that honor goes to Bloom. Bloom is a reaction with a lot of variety in how it can be used. The concept behind Bloom is a genius one. Creating the reaction will do a bit of extra damage, but more importantly create a Dendro core, which has a selection of things you can do with it. Hitting it with Electro turns into a ballistic missile, seeing out the nearest target and dealing some good damage. Hitting it with Pyro will make it explode and do some huge damage. But leaving the core alone will make it explode itself after a while, which is what I'm looking at now. The main concept behind Bloom on its own is simple. Create a minefield. There can only be 5 Dendro cores on field at a time, and any extras will cause the oldest ones to disappear without having to wait. So, if you can get yourself a constant source of Dendro and Hydro, you can just detonate those things non-stop. But, while Bloom does do some nice damage on its own, it's clearly meant to be used in a 3-way, with Electro or Pyro. It's still a really fun reaction on its own though, especially with Nahida and EM stacking. And while we're here, we might as well just get another Hydro reaction. On paper, EC seems practically identical to Vaporize, and they are pretty dang similar, especially against a single target. But use EC against a clump of foes and you'll see its impact. Electro charges whole thing as being able to chain attacks between nearby targets, letting the Electro hit a much larger number of foes than it otherwise would. This is the first reaction that can make really good use of the environment around you. You find a foe standing in a puddle with some dry friends nearby, hit him with some Electro and boom! You've already got a huge advantage. Or even better, when it's raining out, this becomes one of the best reactions in the game. You can string together constant Electro charge attacks on enemies remotely close to each other, which can stack up fast. So, with all its praise, why is Electro charge so low on the list? Well, that's simple. All the things I just praised for are done in a more versatile and interesting way by Swirl. And though I do prefer Swirl, there's a lot of fun to be had with Electro charge regardless. Plus, combining these two reactions can make an absolute ridiculous amount of numbers. Just look at this, you can barely even see the enemies below them all. Overloaded is a reaction that combines the two elements typically known for being main damage dealers, and so it should feel like a really powerful one, and oh boy, does Overload deliver on that. Once you combine Electro and Pyro, you'll end up creating a massive explosion of Pyro damage that does some serious knockback to any smaller enemy unfortunate enough to be caught in range. There's a couple of things to break down here. The first of which being this reaction can do some huge damage. Stack EM on a Pyro character and watch those numbers soar up and up. It's awesome. And think of the elements involved typical roles. Now this explosion is kind of a double-edged sword though. On one hand, it's really funny. The explosion is the best way to score environmental kills from water or cliffs. It can be kind of hard to control, but mastering the angle to send enemies flying away is very rewarding. However, you are sending enemies away from you, which comes with the obvious issue of range. Most of the characters in this game wield melee weapons, so sending enemies careening away from you just creates more of a gap. You can easily waste all your stamina by trying to close that gap. And if you can get an enemy pinned into a corner, sometimes the explosion has no direction to send them but up, which gives even Catalyst and Bow some trouble at that point. Overload certainly isn't a perfect reaction, but for every time the explosion hinders me, there are 2 where it helps me secure a funny kill, so it ends up being one I really like. Wow, another Electro reaction so soon. Superconduct is the first reaction on the list with some really strong calling effects, and the debuffs it inflicts are absolutely wild. Mixing Cryo and Electro on an enemy will do some pretty respectable damage, and more importantly, decrease their physical res by a whopping 40%. This means that Superconduct is the first reaction on her that really needs a team to be built around it. You can't just throw on a bunch of whoever's to try and make a Superconduct team, nah. You gotta pull out some big physical damage dealer, and they can reap the rewards of it. But if you've got some big old greatsword wailing on the enemy while they're constantly being hit by Superconduct, you'll be able to tear through them in seconds. And it helps that there are a lot of really strong physical units who happen to be Electro or Cryo. Eula, Razor, Rosaria, all of them truly show the potential of the reaction. Even if you have someone else built as a physical DPS, like I do, it's not hard to set up but massively pays off. The one drawback is that it's only physical res, so obviously if you're on teams with a lot of catalysts like I do, you won't get too far with Superconduct. But build a team right and you'll really see the difference. And the best part is, it's a flat and unchanging 40%. So you can throw on 2 level 1 characters with no artifact and still get the full debuff. Man, I love this reaction, which really just goes to show how much praise I'm going to be throwing around higher on the list. Wow, another Electro reaction so soon. Hyper Bloom is the first of 2 reactions that spawn from Bloom, and I already covered the specifics of that, so this won't take too long. Hitting a Dendro core with Electro will cause it to take flight and home in on the nearest enemy, while massively increasing the damage we would have done with just Bloom. Compared to Burgeon, Hyper Bloom is leagues better. The homing effect greatly increases range, can hit foes who tend to hover above you, and won't inflict any damage on you, unless an enemy proc the reaction, which is pretty rare. And more importantly, the base reaction between Dendro and Electro is leagues better than that between Dendro and Pyro. However, I do prefer Burgeon because big explosion, big numbers, big thrill. But Hyper Bloom is still a reaction I use all the time, simply because it fits into teams much better than Burgeon, which needs a team built around to see its full potential. It's more flexible, but a tad less fun. Still one I like a lot though. Oh, the amazing things you can do with Freeze. Freeze is an extremely versatile reaction that can work amazingly as both a main reaction or setup for a team because of its fantastic effects. Freeze's power to, get this, freeze targets in place makes it ideal for a couple of things. Firstly, Freeze absolutely fucks big enemies. Put a Freeze against a Rune Guard or a Lolatril and watch the magic happen. It's a miracle to see them get even one hit in. As for major bosses, yeah, not quite as good. Against smaller enemies and running a main DPS who isn't Hydro or Cryo, Freeze still puts in some real work. Being able to stun enemies is an incredible power, and can buy you time to do all sorts of things, like getting some healing or shields up, or moving to a better position for the fight, or switching to a Pyro character and preparing the schmeediest melt reaction of all time. But more on that in a bit. As not even mentioning what you can do by adding an extra element to a Freeze team. Throwing an animal lets you lob Cryo and Hydro around to nearby enemies, without causing any unwanted reactions in the process. And add some Dendro and you can see the sheer power of everyone's favorite non-reaction, Fridge. Freeze is one of the most versatile reactions in the game, and can fit into essentially any team with little thought. But put in a bit of thought, you'll see just how strong it can really be. And now we're at the amazing 3-in-1 I mentioned at the start. Quicken, Aggravate, and Spread, or for short, Catalyze. This fantastic reactive state is caused by combining Dendro and Electro, and is very unique among the reactions. Rather than just causing one big number to appear and doing away with both elements, it'll keep the charged Dendro on the enemy, and then hitting with another Dendro or Electro attack will finally cause the aforementioned big number, but still keep them in the quickened state. In fact, it's pretty dang tough to remove this state from enemies, as you have to hit him with either Pyro or Hydro, both of which still cause a pretty good reaction. Catalyze's reaction is probably just gonna keep getting better as more Dendro characters come out, as it's definitely the best reaction for the element, and seeing how the new characters utilize it, more so than any other reaction, is really gonna make them stand out. I mean, we've only had 4 so far, but 2 of them already make fantastic use of it. Nida's linked attack mechanics, paired with how fast and frequently Catalyze procs, lets her easily trigger on swarms of foes, and with her high EM, she can do some nice damage in the process. And then Tighnari, oh man, this guy only functions because of how good the reaction is. Can you imagine a Dendro DPS without? Well, they do trigger burning all day. You can hit foes with a skill, burst, and anything else you need back to back without worrying about attacks not reacting with anything, which has become unique among him, Nahida, and the Electro DPSs who would also benefit from this amazing reaction. Catalyze is truly unique, and I can't imagine Dendro would be half as much fun without it. While one-of-a-kind reactions are cool and all, sometimes all I want is a nice and simple damaging reaction. And as for anyone who likes big damage reactions, it makes sense that my fair is one of the biggest potential number. Melt occurs when hot and cold collide, and it's the most powerful single reaction in the game. I mean, you only get full power if you use Pyro to deal the blow, but as someone has way too many Pyro characters and this in terms of Cryo, that tends to be pretty easy for me. Additionally, the existence of Freeze really goes a long way in making Melt feel even stronger. Take it from a clean main. There are very few things in this game as satisfying as freezing some poor unfortunate soul, and then hitting it with a critical Melt charge attack from the Wii Last with one of the strongest in the game. Unlike the last few I've looked at, especially Catalyze, there really isn't all too much to dissect with Melt. It really is just big number funny, but sometimes that's all you need. Okay, hear me out. Imagine, if you will, another Pyro reaction with a huge number attached to it that can be triggered constantly and requires a party built around it, as it otherwise just kinda crumbles apart. Oh yeah, also does a huge amount of self-damage. Now, imagine this reaction was the main source of dopamine, and that's Burgeon for you. Burgeon perfectly fits my ideal kind of gameplay style, which is to say, it's stupid, gimmicky, and tons of fun. Burgeon, more so than any other reaction, needs to be thought out to be used properly. It doesn't do much if it's not used as the main reaction, and 3 elements used to trigger don't typically fit into any other sort of party. You need to get a good character who can apply constant Pyro damage, but also shouldn't need to be on field to do so. You need to make sure they get a lot of EM and have an artifact set that helps them with that. You basically need to have a character set aside to be a Burgeoneer and nothing else. But if you're willing to commit to learn and master the ways of the exploding core, you will certainly not regret it. Burgeon triggers when hitting a Dendro core with Pyro, so your party members need to be constantly applying Dendro, Pyro, and Hydro to get anywhere with Burgeon, typically from their bursts. And if you get all the bursts you need up at the same time, you can prepare for the most fantastic dopamine rush of your life. Burgeon does some huge damage, and seeing how frequently you can apply it for those sweet few seconds, you'll be able to cut through just about any non-boss enemy like butter. Now, is Burgeon the best reaction? No, not even close. Basically, everything it does can be done about 100 times better by Hyperbloom, except maybe crowd control. Hyperbloom has the advantages of being better against single targets, having more range, not doing self-damage, having more options for characters to activate it, being more flexible, and Electro just having a substantially better reaction with Dendro than Pyro. But Burgeon? It's funny, and that's all it needs to be. Man, I love opinionated lists. Swirl is a masterpiece of game design. Being able to pick up an element and throw it around doesn't sound all too impressive, but it's how it implemented that makes it so much fun. More than anything, what makes Swirl work is that it won't remove the element if you can catch another foe in its radius. This means that, as long as you have 2 enemies to fight, you can hit with an elemental attack once, then switch in Anemo DPS and just wail them until they're both down, without ever having to worry about reapplying the element. It's like the best of both Electrocharge and Catalyze combined into one reaction, but with some extra pizzazz. Since Swirl just carries elements over, use it to proc more powerful reactions on 2 enemies with different elements on them, or use one of the Anemo skills that holds an element to trigger all sorts of crazy things. Shouts to Electrocharge especially, since it already chains things together, and getting both reactions on the same team can make some crazy numbers, as I mentioned earlier. But it's not just the reaction itself I love, it's how it's used. That's right, I'm bringing out the specific examples. That's how you know I'm getting serious. There are 2 characters who really demonstrate the power of Swirl in unique ways, the first of them being Haizu. Haizu is a catalyst who imbues his fist cups with Anemo, and when he hits an enemy with a melee attack, it causes a small explosion of Anemo. The explosion will obviously cause Swirl to trigger, and that, paired with the frequency of these attacks, means that this guy will be proccing Swirl non-stop, and he really shows how powerful the reaction can be. If you get enemies grouped together with Haizu, which is especially easy thanks to his burst doing just that, you can keep an element on and group them super easily. And if you throw in some other ways to trigger reactions, like I have on this team, you'll just keep the foes in basically a bubble of constant mixing elements made only possible due to Swirl. But the other example I have shows off the things I love even more about this reaction. And the best character to show us off is the other Inazuman Anemo character, Sayu. I kid you not when I say that getting Sayu made me think about the entire game differently. Sayu basically turns herself into a ball of Anemo upon using her skill, which means that she can absorb elements into herself and take on some of their properties. All of a sudden, you start to see ways to absorb elements and use them to your advantage. Like, look at this. I hit this enemy with Cryo, then roll into a torch, which is ordinarily just a background object you never think about, to take its pyro and roll into the foe to proc Melt and Swirl. And the relationship between Sayu and Cryo is amazing. If Sayu absorbs Cryo, she can roll across water. So I start seeing enemies near water not as enemies, but as objects you can give Cryo only to steal it back. But if there are no enemies around, you gotta get a bit more creative with what you use, but the game will reward you for thinking outside the box. While those are the 2 main examples, it feels like just about every Anemo character can use Swirl in some fun and creative way. Even Anemo Traveler's got some pretty neat things they can do with the tornado. There's no reaction that gives you this much freedom, or has anything close to as much variety as Swirl, which is why it is, without a doubt, my favorite reaction in Genshin Impact. But hey, that's just my opinion, and my opinion's almost always wrong. So I'd be interested in hearing what you all think. Feel free to say what you thought of the video, or what reactions you think are best in the comments. Maybe someone can try to justify Crystallize to me. But regardless, thanks for watching. This was a ton of fun to make. I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you did, maybe let me know by subscribing. Plus, I'm pretty close to 500 subs, so any help to get there, helps. Whatever. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Deuces.